It happens to us toward the end of every day. Darkness comes. And as it comes, it reigns over us. We understand it. We deal with it. We understand it, right? We understand why darkness comes on us. Why does it come on us? Why does this darkness come on us night after night? Created it? What's the mechanics of it? Okay, pardon me? Sun goes down. Yeah. Pardon me? Rest. Lots of ideas. Mechanically, as the rotation goes on of the earth and it turns us away from the sun. So we get on the back side of the sphere, if you would. We're on the back side of the ball. And the sun, we're turned away from. It brings darkness. And you know, most of us don't really know darkness. I mean, even out in the country in our land, you have distant lights of towns and the sky is lit up by those artificial. Stewarts were out in Africa where some of these were far off and the night was very dark. Very dark. As a matter of fact, if you have gone through that wonderful experience of being in a cave, and every time you visit a cave, so that you can see, and it gets disorienting. As a matter of fact, if you stay in it very long, you would be disoriented. I mean, we stub our toes going through a dark room that has lights off in a distance and a clock that shows a light in there. Why, in darkness, like in the cave, like out in the lands where they don't have the artificial, it's so dark that you can't even see yourself. And the disorientation. Black darkness. And it comes and it reigns over us. And we deal with it. How do we deal with it? How do we deal with it? We turn on the lights. We turn on the light. You know, it was as I was thinking through this on Wednesday morning, which Wednesday morning is my run morning, and I was out running, and it was in the dark, it was before dawn. And as I was running by a wooded area, and just as I was thinking on this, I heard a couple of dogs come out of the woods through a field, and they spotted me, or something, heard me, I don't know, and they started coming at me. And that's really unusual, because I've run this route for over 10 years now, and I have never had that happen. And when I heard them coming after me, I turned on my light. It's a high-intensity, small flashlight. And I saw, well, it was something that looked like that. Well, maybe not. Okay, but I saw those lights glowing in the dark. The lights of their eyes and the reflection. And then they backed away. Because turning on the light evidently gave them an impression that this guy has something that we can't deal with. Turning on the light. The reason I bring this up this morning is because Jesus, talking about what he comes to, uses that reference to darkness. He said this: "This is your hour when darkness reigns." That's in Luke chapter 22. I'm going to ask you to turn there. Jesus uses a reference to darkness for what he encounters. It's a spiritual darkness. And like the physical darkness which was on them, he says this is when darkness reigns. He uses a word here for reigns. I want to put it up here. There it is. Boy, this really got messed up in the conversion today. It's ekousia. Say that with me. Ekousia. You got to put the emphasis is on here. Accent point. Ekousia. Say it again. Ekousia. And it means authority. It means mastery. It means jurisdiction. It is the time of power. And Jesus said, darkness reigns. Darkness has mastery. Darkness has authority. Darkness has jurisdiction. It's what we come to. Darkness. And we understand darkness, why it comes. It's a turning away from the sun. It's a turning away from the sun. And it's disorienting. As a matter of fact, you can't even see yourself when you get turned away from the sun. And like the physical, so is the spiritual. Jesus is making that reference here. This is when darkness reigns. Disorientation. Not even able to see yourself. You know, I bet you've heard before God's response to darkness. In the beginning, he had one. Do you remember? In the beginning, God created the heavens, the earth, and the earth was without form, and it was empty, unformed, unfilled. And over the face of the earth was darkness. And what did God do? And God said, let there be light. That's what he did. Let there be light. God's response in darkness is to give light, to grant light, to bring light. I want you to know that darkness reigned. Jesus said so. Here, darkness reigns. I want you to know the dark times come. There will be dark times in your life. Darkness comes. Those who are theologically inclined call it dark providence. It's when something from your heart hides the bright, shining face of God. Let him face shine upon you, the scripture says. And there is dark cloud called dark providence that hides that. This past week, I was watching a film from about 1920s. It was on the time in Mexico when there was Christian persecution, so much so that they were killing some of the leaders and basically exiling them in Mexico, as they say, 1920s. And an individual in the film said, this is a dark time. Dark times come. The life of Jesus demonstrates to us a perfect life, and in it, dark times come. What it's not is that God is settling things about your sin. Because there was nothing to settle with Jesus about his sin. There was a dark time. The Bible predicts there will be dark times. Jesus, in this passage we look at, speaks about hard times helpfully. And my point for you is to understand and to deal with them. That's where I'm going. Just like the physical, we understand the dark reigning over us night after night. And we deal with it spiritually too. Now, having given that preliminary, it's time to talk about the detail. And here's the detail. Darkness and trial, or trials, plural. Darkness with other people. When darkness reigns in those two, let there be light. And finally this. Darkness to the finish. When it comes to the end, let there be light. That's what we're going to look at. Father in heaven, as we look at this morning, I pray that by your grace and by your hand, you will usher us into where you want us to be about dark time. Extremely dark time. For now, darkness reigns. And this is your hour, Jesus said. It is the experience of his life. Help us. In Jesus' name, amen. I want you to know that by the time that we get to the passage where we start, if you're with me in Luke chapter 22, verse 63, the experience of Jesus' life, the dark time. Look with me, verse 63. Now, the men who were holding Jesus, he's been arrested. He's been betrayed. He's been denied. And now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, "Prophesy, prophesy, prophesy. Tell us, who just hit you?" Now the reason they did that, because these were Jewish folks, was because of an Isaiah prediction in chapter 11 that the Messiah would not judge by his eyes, nor by what he hears. And they put the blindfold on so he couldn't see. And they kept yelling at him. Who was it? Was it me? Was it him? Who just hit you? You see, he had these amazing abilities. Show us. Show us! Show us! Get the picture? Darkness. And by the time that comes, Jesus has already been in his trial. As a matter of fact, you and I can map this here. Go with me to verse 54. In verse 54, Jesus at night has been arrested in the garden by the betrayal of his trusted friend, who he knew about. And after being arrested and betrayed, verse 54, then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. And Peter stood in a distance. It's night. It's the night of his arrest. And he is led at night to the Jewish trial here. Can I actually tell you that Jesus was tried 6 times by men? 6 times by men in a very short frame of time. 6 times he was tried by men before the judgment was brought down on him. The first one was not actually here in verse 54. The first one here is in John. It says this: then the detachment of troops, when they're in the garden, Peter cuts off his ear, John 18. Jesus says, we're not going to do this. And then the detachment of troops and the captain of the officers of the Jews, that's who it was, arrested Jesus and bound him. And they led him to Annas first. That's where he went first for his trial. To Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. You know, Annas is an interesting character. Very, very interesting character. I've got a little story here. It comes from the words and works of Jesus Christ. And in this, it talks about him being a high priest, Annas. And he was a high priest for only 6 or 7 years. But he became the power broker behind the high priesthood. You see, the high priesthood was sold by Rome for these Jews to the ones who could pay the most. And Annas was a very wealthy person, because he had developed this system of selling things for sacrifice in the temple, and it was very, very lucrative. And he became the power broker behind the high priesthood, because after him, only he was in it for 6 or 7 years, he had 5 of his sons who succeeded him, and his son-in-law, who was Caiaphas, here, and a grandson. And he'd be the one, well, when Jesus is arrested, where do they go first? They go to Annas' house, because he was the father-in-law with the money that bought the priesthood from the Romans. And he was the one who pulled the strings. So they took him to Annas first to see, how is this going to go now that we've taken Jesus at night? And you know, it's very interesting. Tim Keller, writing on the life of Jesus in his book called Jesus the King, he says this, and it's very, very interesting. He says that all four of the gospel writers take pains to show that all the critical events in Jesus' death happened in darkness. Physical darkness. All of the events happened in physical darkness. His betrayal to his arrest, his denial, and his trial, and some other things we'll come to. All of them, when they're turned away from the sun. There's disorientation. So much so that you can't even see yourself. Because when darkness, physically, so spiritually, all comes that way. Annas. And then, after Annas had examined him, then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So Don tells us. So we have this. Anna is first. He's the power player here. That's the first trial of Jesus. Was it fun? Well, let me tell you, that part of the mocking started there with Annas. And then there was Caiaphas. He's the second one here. Verse 54, they took him to Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. And they engaged in this trial. Now, I want you to know that this trial that they engaged in, well, it was a unique thing, because this trial, was completely illegal. There were rules for the Jews, just like there's jurisprudence, rules for trials in our country. There were rules. One of the rules is you couldn't try for a capital of crime like they're accusing him of, because it's clear they want the death penalty. You can't try for a capital crime at night. As a matter of fact, when you go through what they had to deal with, this whole thing took place at night. And there are a few other things that were illegal here, beside the fact that it took place at night. I want to just list a few of them here for you. We won't be doing this the whole time, but I think it's kind of important to hear these. Some of the other illegalities that went on. Number one, they had witnesses who were paid to tell a certain story. Number two, the witness perjured themselves in what they said that didn't agree across the board. Therefore, testimony must be dismissed. The accusations were such that they were on the grounds of observable miracles. His crime was that he claimed to be Christ. Here's how it went. They made the decision at Caiaphas' house, contrary to what was legal, contrary to the evidence, by asking him, "Are you the Christ? Tell us plainly." And Jesus, as recorded in Mark, said this, "I am." And the trial went into a riot. It went berserk. The high priest tears his clothes. They start beating on him, spitting on him. It was bizarre. It was almost as if some spirit came over the whole thing. Well, that was trial number 2. That is where, in the bizarre thing, the verses 66 or 63 through 65 come in, which says this. Now the men who had him mocked him, and they beat him. They said, "Prophesy." And verse 65, and many other things against him, blaspheming him, degrading him. You know, this is the Bible, okay? It's not like, woo, 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 we're going to make up a story to make this sound really good. I mean, one of the most dramatic things in a person's life is to go through a courtroom situation. I've had people connected with the medical field who came back to me after having to schedule that, and they said, "I've never been in that situation before." Well, the dramaticness of this kind of goes up a degree when it's the courtroom situation for your life. And when they're outrightly lying, and it's conducted illegally. I object! I object! There is no attorney to stand up for you because we have the power. Shut up! There was no objection. No objection allowed. Bedlam. Illegality. And then there's the Sanhedrin one. Because they understood this whole thing was illegal, especially occurring at night, verse number 66, when day came very early, the first breaking of the light, before the city starts to stir, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both the chief priests and the scribes, the chief priest of the Sanhedrin and the scribes of the Pharisees. And they led him to the council. And basically they replayed the events of the night before to make it all have an air of acceptance here. They asked him, if you are the Christ, tell us. And Jesus responds. Well, it comes. Jesus responds. It's all for an impression. It's all for an impression that they play this out. In the temple, because another little legality is it took place in Caiaphas' home, which was outside the city, and it had to be in the temple that a capital crime gets tried. So much for that. Let me add this. Jesus gives light here. Darkness. When it rains, let there be light. God's response. From the beginning, God's response. Let there be light. When darkness reigns, let there be light. So they asked him, tell us plainly, are you the Christ? Verse 67. He said to them, if I tell you, you will not believe me. And if I ask you, you will not answer. You know, that's exactly what's happened. If I tell you plainly who I am, I mean, we did this the night before, you're not going to believe me. He's been smacked around for this. He's been spit on and beaten already for this. And so now they've got him in the official place. It's daylight. It's the temple. The elders are here. The 70 of the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees and their scribes, they're around. Here it is. Now tell us, are you the Christ? And he says, if I tell you, you're not going to believe me. You're not going to trust me. And he said, and if I ask you a question, like he did in Luke 20, he asked them a question. Tell me, John the Baptizer's baptism, was it from God or was it from men? And they go back and they said, we don't want to say from God, because if it's from God, then that's who he is, the Messiah. But if we say from men, the people are going to go, ah! And we'll lose them. So, we don't know. Well, that was a good answer, Jesus said. And then he told them, if I ask you a question, you won't answer me. Then he brings light. But he says, from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God. You know what he's saying here? He's alluding, he's referring to Daniel chapter 7, where it talks about the Son of Man, and the Son of Man comes in power, and he comes when God sets up his judgment, and the Son of Man is handed the judgment and the kingdom and the control of all the people, and they know about this reference to the Son of Man. And the right hand of the power of God is a reference to Psalm 110, verse 1, where it talks about being at the right hand of God. And the right hand of God, the person is there who brings judgment. And he is telling them, as they are judging him, this is the truth. The Son of Man is going to come at the right hand of God in power. Should that have helped them? should have. Here's what they do. Verse 7, so they all say, you are the Son of God then. You are the Son of God then. Because they knew that Son of Man in Daniel 7. And they knew the Psalm 110 verse 1 is talking about someone who's divine. And they didn't anticipate that the coming anointed one, the Messiah who they were looking for, was going to be divine. And so they said, you are saying you are the Son of God. Then. And I want you to know, Jesus is not being elusive here. He says to them this, you say that, I am. Do you get this? You were saying that, and I am. That's what he says, literally. You say that, I am. Mark just says it point blank. He just says, I am. And then they said, what further testimony do we need? We've heard it for our own selves. What's he guilty of? He's guilty of being the Christ demonstrated to them, and the Christ being divine. And by their court system, it's just been demonstrated to them. It's just been in testimony. But this isn't going to stand up with Rome. He is the divine Jewish king. What do I have to do with your Jewish garbage? Go deal with that yourself. That's what Rome would do. Get out of here with that. Get out of here. Say that with me. Get out of here. Get out of here with that. That's what they would do. So, trials. Here we go. In trial, that's the Jewish one. Now we're ready for this one. Here's the civil one. Because now they're going to take him, agreed upon, we got a charge, we're going to go to Pilate. First one, Pilate, verse 1. Then the whole company of them, all 70, and some of the people who they had hired to come along, and they brought him before Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, we found this man, and there's 3 charges here. Number 1, he is charged with subversion. He's a subversive. He's misleading the nation. He's subversive. He's taking them somewhere. Number 2, he's tax evasion. He forbids us to give taxes to Caesar. Tax evasion. He's a subversive, and it's tax evasion. Okay? And besides that, also this. He's an insurrectionist, saying that he himself is Christ a king. There you go. That fits Rome. 3 charges. We got it. Subversion, tax evasion, insurrection. There you go. That works. And so they take him to Pilate. And Pilate says to him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus answers. Now, John has a whole bunch more of this, which we'll see in a moment here. But it comes down to this. You've said so. And Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, what did they say? I find no guilt here. There's nothing here. Your charges are a hoax. It's nothing. But because he heard that Jesus was from Galilee, what does he do? Number 2. Where does he send him? Here. He sends him to Herod. Because Herod was over Galilee. You remember, Judah and Jerusalem was down here, and Galilee was up there, and that's where Jesus had most of his ministry, some down here in Jerusalem, but most up there. And when they heard that he was there from that territory up in Galilee, Send him up to Herod. That's a good solution. We'll send him to Herod. Now, Herod was kind of happy to see him. Why? Huh?
He wanted to see him.
Yeah, because this guy's a magician. This guy can do things. So, hey, do for me a miracle. I'm Herod. Play for me. And Jesus, what does Jesus do here? Doesn't say anything. Because this is a game. And it's not saying anything. So they do the same thing they did to him before. They dress him in the king's royal robe, and they mock him, and they spit on him, and they make fun of him, and they deride him, and it's a dark time by civil authority. And then he goes to Herod, or he goes back to Pilate. Because Herod finds no guilt. So then, verse 13. Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, "You've brought me this man as one misleading the people, a subversive. And after examining him before you, behold, I find no guilt. I find this man guilty of nothing, of none of your charges. Neither did Herod, because he sent him back, nothing deserving of death. Therefore, I will punish him and let him go. Not guilty." That's trial. There's dark times. Hey, did you ever have something happen to you which wasn't fair? You ever have something said that wasn't true about you and formed other people's ideas? You know what that feels like? Who knows what that feels like? What that feels like? It's like, this isn't fair! I'm going to show them! That's how it goes? Is that how it goes? That's how it goes with me. When I have this and I tell Alita, she says sweet words like this. Time and truth will meet. Time and truth will meet. I haven't got time to wait till it meets. I need to get it to meet now. There's dark times. Dark times. People against you, lies, deception, suffering that isn't deserved. So was Jesus' trial. And I want you to see something here. That in this darkness, Jesus brings light. This time when he's talking to Pilate, here, we're going to take the time to do this. Flip with me to John 18. John 18 and verse 33. In John 18 and verse 33, we have the expanded. You remember John was a friend of the high priest, and he just went right in, and he goes back and gets Peter, and he was able to bring Peter into this. Well, John has some inside information. And John has inside information on this meeting with Jesus and Pilate. So here it is. Jesus is before Pilate. And so Pilate enters the room and he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "Do you say this on your own, or did somebody else tell you about me?" And Pilate answered him, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation, your chief priests have delivered you up to me. What have you done?" And Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" And Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." You see what Jesus does? Jesus gives light here. To Pilate, he gives light. He takes him to himself, I came here to tell you the truth. Listen to me. I came here to tell you the truth. Listen to me. I came here to tell you the truth. Some of us are too busy for the truth. Our lives are too important. We've got things we've got to do. I've got an image to maintain. I've got my interests to live. Do you know what Pilate had to do? They went to him early in the morning, number one, to get the legality of this thing going, but also to get to Pilate before he started his day of self-absorbed leisure. That's where he was going. That's what he was doing. That's where he was headed. And Pilate is too busy being self-absorbed with his interest to take a time to hear truth. Because his response is, what is truth? And he leaves. I want you to see, when darkness reigns, God, let there be light. Even in the darkest time of Jesus' life. Okay, so that's the trial. Let's take a look here with other people. With other people. When darkness reigns with other people, let there be light. I want you to see this situation. Going back with me to Luke chapter 23, because that's where we're at now. At verse 26, and then they seized Jesus, because Pilate delivers him up to their will. Though he finds no guilt, he released Barabbas. You know the story. The guy who was guilty, verse 25, of insurrection and murder. He was charged with these. He was guilty. He gave them up by the people's choice and for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over their will to a capital crime, to be put to death, Roman style. So Jesus is now on a procession. He was just arrested last night. He's gone through 6 judgments, and now, at this point, has the sentence of death on his head for something that the civil authorities say he's not guilty of. So, he goes. And as he goes, he's carrying his own cross, and they get Cyrene, Simon of Cyrene. And there is the crowd of people. And Jesus gives them light. He talks to them about the future. This would be so interesting to do, but I just want you to know that Jesus gives them light here. He quotes what takes place in Revelation 6 to help them out here. And then there's the criminals here. Look at verse 33 or verse 32. 2 other criminals who were Jesus were led away to be put to death too. Now the next part goes on about the crucifiers. Let's slide down to verse 39 where the criminals come up again. And one of the criminals who was hanging there railed at him. Are you not the Christ? Save yourself. Save us. Others rebuked him, the other criminal. Don't you fear God? So here, in the criminals, we have an excellent illustration from the Lord of where people stand. People stand here dismissing Jesus, saying, what can you do for me now? What can you do for me now? What can you do for me now? Or here, recognizing their sinfulness and their other need for him. Listen to me. This is an excellent visual illustration of people's response to Jesus. Everyone in this room has one of these 2 responses. Everyone. Either the attitude will be, you're the Christ, what can you do for me now? What can you do for me now? Or, oh my God, I have no hope. I have no hope of ever getting to heaven on my own. Jesus, remember me. That's the two responses. Where are you, by the way? Where are you? Where are you? This could be no more important question than you will hear for your entire life. Where are you right now? Wanting the Lord to step up and do something for you now because your life is so big? Or are you, oh my, I'm not. Where are you? Jesus brings light here. His promise. You can tell me the promise. Tell me the promise. What does he say here? What's the promise? Today? Can you tell me this? If you can tell me this, okay? Today, you're going to be with me in the park. That is, the park like the Garden of Eden where God's people go. What did this guy ever do to get to earn heaven? What did he ever do? Was he ever baptized? Did he ever do one good work after he trusted Jesus? How did he get to go? Because of Jesus he got to go. And Jesus told him, today, it's not down the road, buddy, you and me, today. Wow. You know, I wish that it could be so serious to your heart that you knew it could be today. Because then would we see what he's doing here. Okay, so even right at the point of the cross where they know I'm dying today, one person is self-absorbed. What can you give me that makes my life bigger now? And the other guy, I just got to throw myself at your feet and trust you. It happens. Let me tell you, if somebody was dying on the cross with Jesus, it's still going to happen. We think sometimes major events in people's lives is going to drive them to God. I want you to know it doesn't necessarily do it. The only thing that does it is that we submit to the Spirit. And then there's the crucifiers here. The crucifiers. The crucifiers are in verse 33. And they came to the place called Skull, and they crucified him there with the criminals, one on the right hand, one on the left. And Jesus said about the crucifiers, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And they divided the garments, and they mocked him, and they scoffed at him, and they said to him, you saved others, you can't save yourself. If you're the Christ, if you're the chosen one, do this. And the soldiers were mocking him and offering him sour wine, and this is the King of the Jews, and they were, ha, 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 this is a good time. But I want you to know that even in this, Jesus gives light. Even in this, listen to me. He gives light here. Not by what he says. They're words that come. But what he does. Look at verse 47. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, when he saw what had happened here, what Jesus had done, he praised God and he said, certainly this was an innocent man. That news was out. There's no crimes against him. And Jesus, when he dies here, let me ask this question. Jesus, in how he dies, whoop, something happened there. We lost a couple of things. All right. Jesus, in how he dies, gives light. He saw him breathe his last. He saw what took place, and the centurion, according to Mark, is the first one to say, this guy really is the Son of God. This really is an innocent man. So, let's talk about this to the finish. Because Jesus dies. And Jesus died just like this. Verses 44 and following. Now from the 6th hour to the 9th hour there was darkness. Every major event in Jesus' death happened in darkness. Betrayal, denial, arrest, trials, all of them in darkness. And now they put him on the cross at 9 a.m., and when it gets to be 12 noon, the 3rd hour, it goes dark. And there was darkness over the whole land. Excuse me, the 3rd hour is 9 a.m., the 6th hour is noon, 9th hour is 3 in the afternoon. There was darkness from 6 to 9. Middle of the day. Why did it get dark? Why was there darkness? Why was there darkness? Verse 46 says, the sunlight failed. Some people say it was an eclipse, a total eclipse of the sun. Do you know how long a total eclipse of the sun lasts? Minutes. Darkness is minutes. And for it to be a total eclipse of the sun, you can't have a full moon at the same time. And Passover, they have a full moon. Some people say it must have been a dust storm that came up. You remember they had the Great Plains and they had those dust storms that would darken the sun? Surely it could have been that. Problem is, this is their wet season. It's like our wet season. No dust blowing. Here's what happened. God darkened the sun because people were turned away from the sun. And there was disorientation. And he's going to orient them. And they couldn't even see themselves. He's going to help them see. There was darkness. And God helps them see, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from the top to the bottom. What's significant about that? This isn't a sheer on a living room curtain, okay? This is not some lacy thing that flutters in the wind. My wife opened the windows yesterday, and the lacy things were fluttering in the wind. This is not that. This is a heavy kind of line of demarcation, and it was torn. What does that indicate? This way into God's presence is opened. It tore. And Jesus had words that he said. This thing of the darkness. God brings the darkness because he's bringing judgment. Over and over in scriptures, we see darkness in God's judgment. Who's being judged here? Jesus is being judged. And God is pouring out on him all of your sin. Tore the temple curtain from the top to the bottom. Your sin being dealt with. That's who's being judged. And there were words. The words went like this. Ila, ila, lama sabachthani. Which are, translate that. my God, why have you forsaken me? Why was I left alone here? Was he saying that for us? Of course. Not for himself. It wasn't a question about him. He's answering the question of why and who, because judgment is pouring out, and judgment is pouring out on him, and the judgment is that God is turning away, and God is crushing his soul. God is making him an offering for sin. God is doing this right now, and God shows this by the darkness that his judgment is coming now. And he was there. 3 hours he was there. In the darkness. Lift it up. We're not even talking here about the physical aspects. We're talking about the spiritual aspects. This is the darkness of his spirit. He was left alone. And while he's alone, they mock. They laugh. And Jesus gives light. He then says, it is. What this Roman soldier sees is not somebody trembling and terrified and cowering in death. He sees a man physically struggling and a man who lifts up his voice and says, "I finished it! It's done here! It's over! It's finished!" And his next words, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And just then, his head drops and it's done. Jesus dies. And it's over. It's finished. And to the end, God gives light. To the very end, God gives light. To the very last breath, he's giving light. He's showing light to you and to me. He's delivering light in the darkness hour. And there was grievous death. When he died, and he breathed his last, the centurion responds in verse 48, all the crowd, they return home, and they're beating their breasts. And the women who are acquainted with him stand at a distance. Hey, you know, this sermon, wow, it's been so heavy. My wife tells me, why do I always do heavy sermons at Easter time? Well, because it's such a light topic, you know. The death of Jesus for everyone's sin. Do you know what the weight of sin is? Do you know what your sin, just yours, your sin alone, you know what that would do for you? It would put you in hell forever, just yours. How about everybody's? Everybody's. That's where he is. We can't get around this. That's where he is. And when he dies victorious because I've finished it. And he breathes his last. Life goes back to the Father. Whew. Whew. Done. And those who are standing around, you think you feel a little heavy. Think what it would have been on Golgotha's hill, Calvary, like it's been by the Gentiles. Can you imagine what that would have been like? How about if you had put all your trust in this guy? You left your home and you just did everything for him. You, as a woman, you came down from Galilee and you used your money to support his ministry. And there he is, and he's dead. And he's supposed to be the guy who rules. And he's dead. And then you see these two guys, Joseph of Arimathea, here. These two guys. There it is. There it is. Opportunity. Two guys, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, one of the Sanhedrin, a Sadducee, and one of the Pharisees. They get together and they take care of him. They go put him in their own tomb. They handle the cost and the expense. These two guys. Why? Because the Bible says they believed in him. They were here in the Sanhedrin as a Sadducee, and they were there as a Pharisee leaders, and they believed him when everybody else went against him. And they showed it because this was an opportunity for them to step up and to show that Jesus is something to me. And they put him in a grave, their own. And they paid the expenses. They got the linen and they bought the spices, and the women standing off seeing these two Judeans didn't know what to do, so they went home and made their own mix, and they're coming out after the Sabbath because it's sundown. And his followers take the opportunity. Can I do this? When there's darkness, God says, let there be light. There is darkness. You will have darkness. There will be dark times. You've had dark times. You, in these dark times, get disoriented. Sometimes you are so overcome with the darkness that you can't even see yourself. And then, here's the help. Light. Because this dark time isn't because God's getting even with you. I've had people who were grown, mature believers, and they had something hard come in their life, and their words are, God is getting even with me for my... No! 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 Not in Christ! Not now! Not ever! Because here is Jesus! And he was in a dark time. And he brought our escape. He brought our rescue. Here's light. Your rescue is in him. Go to him. Hear from him. Get on your shoes and run to him. Because we've got nowhere else to go. And I want you to know that when you do, you will have light. And you will be rescued. There is no other way. Okay. I'm a voice crying in the wilderness. But it is the way. Run there. Father in heaven, in darkness, there is always your light. Maybe run there, and if we don't run there, help us to run to people who will get us there. And God, thank you for Jesus. Above all.